The email notification chimed on my phone as I reviewed the quarterly sales report in my downtown Minneapolis office. Congratulations, Ms. Andrews. The Board of Harvest Restaurant Supply has unanimously approved your acquisition offer. I smiled to myself, taking a sip of my coffee as I gazed out at the cityscape below. 8 years of methodical planning, strategic networking, and relentless innovation had led to this moment. Harvest Restaurant Supply, once my family's modest business, then the scene of my greatest disappointment, and now my newest acquisition. I ran my fingers across the embossed logo on my leather portfolio. Cornerstone Restaurant Solutions, the company I'd built from scratch after walking away from everything I thought would be my legacy. Now valued at over $120 million with operations in 12 states and Canada. And today, we had just acquired the very business my father had told me I wasn't worthy to lead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Everything okay, Ms. Andrews? My assistant Tina's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Perfect, Tina. The coffee is excellent as always. I slipped a 20 into the tip jar for the office barista who had just delivered our morning orders, then gathered my things. Please have David bring the car around. I need some time to think before the executive meeting. As the elevator descended the 30 floors to the lobby of the Andrews Tower, I allowed my mind to drift back to that day in my father's office, when everything I'd worked for was ripped away with a few carelessly spoken words. 8 years ago, I was Emma Andrews, daughter of William Andrews, founder of Harvest Restaurant Supply. What had started as a small kitchen equipment store had grown into a regional powerhouse under my leadership as COO. Dad had recruited me right after business school, passing over opportunities at prestigious consulting firms to help modernize our family business. "We need your fresh perspective, Emma," he'd said. "This place is stuck in the past. Help me bring it into the future." And I had. For 7 years, I'd poured everything into transforming Harvest, developing our online ordering platform, establishing relationships with restaurant chains across the Midwest, and creating our own branded line of commercial kitchen equipment manufactured locally. Annual revenue had grown from $3 million to over $50 million. We'd expanded from 1 location to 8 distribution centers. Our staff had increased from 12 employees to over 200. Through it all, my younger sister Claire had been pursuing her dreams in New York: fashion design, art history, a brief stint in publishing. Her path changed every year or so with Dad's blessing and financial support. "Claire's finding herself," he'd explain whenever I expressed frustration at covering for her absence at family business events. The sleek company car pulled up as I exited the building. David, my driver, opened the door with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ms. Andrews. To the office?" "Not yet, David. Let's drive along the river first. I'd like some time to process the news." As we glided through downtown Minneapolis, past the familiar landmarks I'd known since childhood, I couldn't help but revisit that fateful meeting. It had been a Tuesday in April, unusually warm for Minnesota in spring. I'd just finalized our expansion into Chicago, a move that would increase our footprint by 30%. "Dad, I've got the final numbers on the Chicago location," I'd said, entering his office with a stack of projections and contracts. "We're set to close on the property next month. This puts us in position to hit $60 million by year-end." William Andrews had looked up from his computer, but there was none of the enthusiasm I'd expected. Instead, his expression was oddly guarded. "Sit down, Emma. We need to talk about the future of Harvest." My heart had leapt. After years of hinting, was Dad finally ready to discuss succession? At 32, I'd been effectively running the company for years while he enjoyed semi-retirement, coming into the office 3 days a week at most. "I've been thinking about leadership transition," he continued, confirming my hopes. "As you know, I'm not getting any younger." I nodded, trying to contain my excitement. I've actually prepared some thoughts on that. I have a 5-year plan for expansion that would take us to— Claire's moving back to Minneapolis, he interrupted. I faltered, confused by the non sequitur. Oh? That's nice. Did her gallery position not work out? She's completed her MBA at Columbia. She graduated last week, top of her class. This was news to me. Claire had mentioned taking some business courses, but an MBA? When had this happened? And why hadn't she told me? That's wonderful, I managed, trying to reorganize my thoughts. We could certainly use her talents in marketing or product development. I've been wanting to strengthen that team. Dad cleared his throat, the sound unnervingly final. Actually, Emma, I'm bringing Claire in as president. I'll be stepping back to chairman, and I want her to take over day-to-day operations. The world seemed to stop. I could hear the ticking of the vintage clock on his wall, the muffled conversations from the hallway, the distant ringing of phones. But none of it made sense anymore. President? But I'm COO. I've been running this company for years while she was finding herself. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. And you've done a fine job, Dad said in that patronizing tone that made me feel 16 again. You've always been detail-oriented, great with operations and logistics. But Claire has the vision, the big-picture thinking we need for the next level. Her professors say she has exceptional strategic abilities. Strategic abilities? I repeated incredulously. Dad, I just orchestrated our expansion into 3 new states. I developed our first proprietary product line. I built the e-commerce platform that now generates 40% of our revenue. Yes, following the plans we agreed upon. But Claire brings fresh eyes, connections from her time in New York, and frankly, a natural leadership quality that inspires people. The implication was clear. Despite everything I'd achieved, my father didn't see me as a leader. In his eyes, I was still just the reliable daughter who executed other people's visions. So what are you saying? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. That I should report to my younger sister who has never spent a day working in this business? Dad had the decency to look uncomfortable. I thought you might take on the role of CUO and CFO combined. Claire isn't as strong with numbers, and you've always excelled there. I stood up, my legs somehow supporting me despite feeling like my world was collapsing. Let me make sure I understand. I've spent 7 years building this business, growing it from a small local supplier to a regional leader, and now that it's successful, you want to hand the presidency to Claire because she has an MBA from Columbia. And natural leadership quality? Emma, don't be dramatic. This is what's best for the company. No, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. This is what you want, Dad. It has nothing to do with what's best for Harvest. Claire doesn't know this industry. She doesn't know our customers, our suppliers, or our employees. She'll learn, and she'll have you to help her. The casual presumption that I would stay and train my replacement, my own sister, to take the position I had earned was the final insult. No, she won't, I said quietly. I resign, effective immediately. The shock on his face would have been satisfying if I hadn't been fighting back tears. For a moment, he looked genuinely blindsided, as if the possibility that I might walk away had never occurred to him. Don't be hasty, Emma. You're upset. Take some time to think it over. I've given this company everything for 7 years, Dad. Nights, weekends, holidays. I've missed birthdays and friendships and relationships because I believed I was building something that would be mine someday. If you can't see my value after all that, you never will. I placed my company keycard on his desk. I'll have my office cleared by the end of the day. My driver's voice pulled me back to the present. We're approaching the river, Ms. Andrews. Any particular spot you'd like to stop? The lookout near the old mill will be fine, David. As the car pulled into the scenic overlook, I gazed. At the Mississippi flowing below, powerful and unstoppable. So much had happened since that day I walked out of my father's office. My phone buzzed with a text from my chief strategy officer, Megan Kim. Board is assembled in conference room A. Transition team prepared for harvest integration. Press release drafted for your approval. I texted back a quick acknowledgement and checked the time. In 30 minutes, I would walk into the executive meeting at Cornerstone to finalize our acquisition of Harvest Restaurant Supply. In 2 hours, I would enter Harvest headquarters, not as the dutiful daughter returning to the fold, but as its new owner. The journey from that devastating day to this triumphant one hadn't been easy. When I left Harvest, I had my reputation, my industry knowledge, and my savings, substantial, but nowhere near enough to start a competing business at scale. What I also had, though I didn't fully appreciate it then, was the loyalty of people who recognized my contribution. Tratisi. Days after my resignation, Marcus Reynolds, our top sales executive at Harvest, called me. "This is insanity, Emma." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Half the leadership team is talking about leaving. Your father has no idea what he's done. "Let me guess," I said. Claire arrived with a PowerPoint presentation full of buzzwords and a bold new vision that involves undermining everything we've built. Marcus's silence was confirmation enough. "Look, I don't want to badmouth your sister, but this is a mistake. What are you planning to do?" At that point, I had no clear plan, just a determination not to be defined by my father's rejection. "I'm exploring my options," I said vaguely. "Well, when you figure it out, a lot of us want to be part of it. Whatever it is." That conversation was the first indication that I might not be starting from zero after all. Over the next 2 weeks, similar calls came from suppliers, customers, and other Harvest employees. Word had spread about the circumstances of my departure, and many were outraged on my behalf. The turning point came when I met Olivia Chen for coffee. Olivia and I had been friends since college, but our paths had diverged when she went to law school and I returned to Minneapolis for the family business. Now a partner at a respected firm specializing in business law, she listened intently as I recounted what had happened. "So your sister is now president of a $50 million company she knows nothing about, and your father expects it to go well?" Olivia shook her head in disbelief. "What does your mother say about all this?" "Mom's tried to play peacemaker, but she won't openly contradict Dad. She keeps saying these things have a way of working themselves out." I sighed, stirring my latte absently. The worst part is that I still love the business. I built those relationships. I developed those systems. Walking away from it all feels like giving up. Olivia studied me for a long moment. "What if you didn't have to give it all up? What if you could build something new, but better?" "With what capital? Dad owns controlling interest in Harvest. It's not like we can force a sale." "Not Harvest itself," Olivia clarified. "But what about the business model you created? The systems, the relationships? Those aren't proprietary to Harvest. They're the result of your expertise and vision." She leaned forward, eyes bright with the intensity that had always made her a formidable debate opponent in school. "Emma, you transformed a small local business into a regional powerhouse. You did that. Not your father, and certainly not your sister. What if you started fresh, with everything you've learned, but without the limitations of your father's outdated thinking?" The idea took root immediately. I'd never considered entrepreneurship, had always assumed my path was to eventually take over the family business. But now, with that door closed, others were opening. "I'd need startup capital," I mused, mind already racing with possibilities. "And a business plan that differentiates from Harvest enough to avoid non-compete issues." Olivia smiled. "Now you're thinking like a founder instead of an employee." And as for capital, she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. My firm has connections with several venture capital groups that focus on women entrepreneurs. They particularly love stories about experienced industry leaders breaking away to innovate. That conversation sparked what would become Cornerstone, Restaurant Solutions. With Olivia's help, I secured meetings with potential investors. My track record at Harvest spoke for itself, and my vision for a more comprehensive approach to restaurant supply, not just equipment, but design services, inventory management software, and staff training, resonated with funders looking for disruptive business models. Within 6 months, I had raised enough capital to launch Cornerstone in a modest office space in downtown Minneapolis. Marcus Reynolds joined as my head of sales, bringing with him 2 key account managers from Harvest. We started small, focusing on high-end restaurant groups that valued our consultative approach and comprehensive solutions. What we lacked in size, we made up for in innovation and personalized service. While Harvest, now under Claire's leadership, continued with its traditional distribution model, we developed proprietary inventory management software that integrated with point-of-sale systems, allowing restaurants to automate their ordering based on actual usage patterns. News of my father's reaction to my new venture came through my mother, who called weekly despite the tension. "Your father saw the article about Cornerstone in the Business Journal," she said carefully. He was surprised. Surprised that I didn't just disappear after he dismissed everything I've accomplished. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Emma, honey, he's complicated. He truly believes he did what was best for the company. By putting Claire, who had never worked, a day in the industry in charge? Mom, be honest. How's that going?" Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. There have been some adjustment challenges. Several longtime employees have left. There was an issue with the Chicago expansion. The deal fell through. I felt a pang for the business I'd helped build, now floundering under inexperienced leadership. But I had my own company to worry about, and it was growing faster than I'd dared hope. By the end of our first year, Cornerstone had secured contracts with 3 major restaurant groups, established partnerships with innovative equipment manufacturers, and developed a reputation for forward-thinking solutions. Our revenue hit $8 million, modest compared to Harvest, but extraordinary for a startup. In year 2, we expanded to Chicago. Ironically, into the very location I had originally scouted for Harvest. We hired Erica Johnston, a brilliant software developer who had been overlooked at her previous company, to lead our tech division. Under her guidance, our inventory management system evolved into Restaurant IQ, a comprehensive platform that became our flagship product. Meanwhile, reports from former colleagues who remained at Harvest painted a picture of stagnation and declining morale. Claire had implemented a series of flashy but superficial changes, rebranding with an expensive new logo, renovating the headquarters with designer furniture, hosting lavish client events, while neglecting the operational excellence that had been our foundation. "They're bleeding customers," Marcus told me after a chance encounter with Harvest's new sales director at an industry conference. "Your replacement isn't working out, and Claire blames everyone but herself. Your father is back in the office full-time, trying to right the ship." I took no pleasure in hearing about Harvest's struggles. Too many good people still worked there. People who had been kind to me and who depended on the company's success for their livelihoods. But I couldn't deny feeling vindicated. The business acumen my father had dismissed was proving its worth. Through Cornerstone's remarkable growth, by year 5, we had expanded to 5 states, with offices in Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Indianapolis. Our annual revenue exceeded $60 million, surpassing what Harvest had achieved under my leadership. We employed over 300 people, many of them industry veterans who had sought us out after hearing about our culture of recognition and innovation. The river stretched before me, its current strong and purposeful. Like me, I thought with a small smile David's voice interrupted my reflections. Ms. Andrews, it's nearly time for your executive meeting. Thank you, David. Let's head back. As we drove toward downtown, I considered the day ahead. At 10 a.m., I would meet with my leadership team to review the Harvest acquisition details. At 2 p.m., I would walk into Harvest headquarters, a building I hadn't entered in 8 years, to address their employees as their new CEO. According to our intelligence, neither my father nor Claire knew the identity of the acquiring company. The purchase had been conducted through a holding company, with all negotiations handled by intermediaries. Today would be the first time they learned that the daughter and sister they had underestimated had returned, not as a subordinate, but as their boss. I felt no vindictive glee at the thought, only a sense of completion. This acquisition wasn't about revenge, it was about business. Harvest had valuable supplier relationships and an established customer base. Their operations needed the modernization that Cornerstone could provide. The synergies made perfect sense. If there was personal satisfaction in the situation, it came not from triumphalism, but from the knowledge that I had built something meaningful on my own terms. My father had unintentionally given me the push I needed to discover my true potential outside the constraints of the family business. As our car pulled into the underground garage of the Andrews Tower, my phone rang. The screen displayed, "Mom." My finger hovered over the accept button. What would she say? Did she already know? After a moment's hesitation, I answered, "Hi, Mom. Emma, honey." Her voice was strained. "Have you heard the news about Harvest?" "What news?" I asked, maintaining the pretense. "It's being sold. The board approved it this morning. Your father is devastated. He and Claire had no idea this was coming." I stepped out of the car, nodding thanks to David as he held the door. "That's business, Mom. Companies get acquired all the time. But Harvest is family. It's our legacy. Your grandfather started that company. And Dad decided it wasn't my legacy, remember? He made that very clear." She sighed heavily. "Emma, that was 8 years ago. People make mistakes. Your father has regretted how things happened. Has he ever said that to me? Has he ever once called to acknowledge that he was wrong?" Her silence was answer enough. "I need to go, Mom. I have a meeting. I'll call you later." As I ended the call, I entered the elevator that would take me to the executive floor of the building that bore my company's name. In 2 hours, I would face my father and sister across a conference table, not as the daughter who wasn't good enough, but as the CEO who had built a company twice the size of theirs. Life had come full circle, but I was no longer the same person who had walked out of Harvest 8 years ago. I was stronger, wiser, and leading an organization that valued innovation, integrity, and recognition of talent. All the things I had tried to instill at Harvest, but had been prevented from fully implementing. My executive team was waiting. When I arrived at the conference room, Megan Kim, my CSO, Marcus Reynolds, now Executive VP of Sales, Erica Johnston, our CTO, and half a dozen others who had been instrumental in Cornerstone's growth. Some were former Harvest employees who had followed me. Others were talented professionals we had recruited from competitors or developed internally. "Good morning, everyone," I said, taking my place at the head of the table. "Today marks a significant milestone for Cornerstone. Our acquisition of Harvest Restaurant Supply is complete." I paused, looking around at the faces of the men and women who had helped build this company from nothing. Many of you know my history with Harvest. Some of you lived it alongside me. What you might not know is that this acquisition isn't about settling old scores. It's about bringing together two companies with complementary strengths to create something greater than either could become alone. Megan pulled up the integration plan on the large screen. "We've identified key talent at Harvest that we want to retain," she explained. "Their sourcing team has relationships with European manufacturers that would take us years to develop independently. Their customer base in the casual dining sector complements our strength in fine dining and institutional markets. For the next hour, we reviewed the transition plan, which harvest systems would be maintained, which would be replaced with Cornerstone's more advanced technologies, how the organizational chart would merge, creating opportunities for talented employees from both companies. As the meeting concluded, Marcus lingered behind. "Are you ready for this, Emma? Facing your father and sister after all this time?" I considered the question carefully. 8 years ago, I walked out of that building feeling like I had lost everything. Today, I'm walking in having built something better than what I left behind. So, yes, I'm ready. He nodded, satisfied. "The team is with you, all the way." 2 hours later, my car pulled up outside the familiar brick building that housed Harvest Restaurant Supply. The sign had been updated. Claire's influence, no doubt, but the structure remained essentially unchanged from my grandfather's day. As I entered the lobby, the receptionist, someone new, hired after my departure, looked up with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Harvest. How may I help you?" "Emma Andrews to see William and Claire Andrews. I believe they're expecting representatives from the acquiring company." Her eyes widened slightly at my last name, but she maintained her professionalism. "Of course, Ms. Andrews. The conference room is prepared. Shall I escort you?" "No need," I replied with a small smile. "I know the way." Taking a deep breath, I walked down the corridor toward the future that awaited. Not the one my father had denied me, but the one I had created for myself. As I walked through the familiar corridors of Harvest, memories flooded back. The framed photographs of my grandfather cutting the ribbon at the original storefront. The industry awards we'd won during my tenure as COO. Even the faint scent of coffee and printer toner seemed unchanged after all these years. Employees I didn't recognize glanced up as I passed, curiosity in their eyes. A few veteran staff members did double takes, their expressions shifting from surprise to something more complex. Respect, perhaps, or vindication. News would spread quickly. I nodded professionally to acknowledge them, but kept walking. Outside the main conference room, I paused to gather myself. Inside waited the two people who had altered the course of my life with their lack of faith in my abilities. I smoothed my blazer, checked my reflection in the glass door, and entered with confident strides. My father sat at the head of the table, looking older than I remembered. The confident posture I'd known all my life had diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. Beside him, Claire looked polished in designer clothing, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story than her carefully applied makeup. For a moment, they both stared, clearly stunned by my appearance. Claire recovered first. "Emma." Her voice wavered between disbelief and caution. "What are you doing here?" My father said nothing, his face draining of color as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I'm here representing Cornerstone Restaurant Solutions, the company that has acquired Harvest." "You?" Claire's voice rose an octave. "You're behind this?" I placed my portfolio on the table and took a seat across from them. Cornerstone's board unanimously approved the acquisition last quarter. Today's meeting is to discuss transition plans. My father finally found his voice. "This is impossible. You arranged this behind our backs?" "Actually, everything was done through proper channels. Your board, several members of which you appointed after I left, voted unanimously to accept our offer. Given Harvest's financial position over the past 3 years, it was the responsible choice." Claire flushed with anger. "This is about revenge, isn't it? You couldn't stand that Dad chose me, so you've orchestrated this whole thing to humiliate us." I kept my expression neutral, refusing to be baited. "This is about business, Claire. Cornerstone has expanded into 12 states and Canada. We're moving into international markets next year. Harvest has valuable supplier relationships that align with our growth strategy. The acquisition makes perfect financial sense. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You expect us to believe this isn't personal? After everything that happened? I met his gaze directly. What I expect is professionalism during this transition. My personal history with Harvest gives me unique insight into its operations, which will facilitate a smoother integration. That's all. The door opened, and Megan entered with several members of our transition team. Sorry we're late. Traffic was heavier than expected. No problem. We were just getting started, I replied, grateful for the interruption. Let's begin with the formal presentation. For the next hour, we outlined the integration plan. Claire sat in stony silence while my father alternated between disbelief and resignation. Neither could argue with the thoroughness of our strategy or the clear benefits for Harvest's remaining employees, many of whom would find expanded opportunities within Cornerstone's growing operation. When the formal presentation concluded, I asked my team to give us the room. Once we were alone, my father spoke first, his voice low and tightly controlled. How long have you been planning this? The acquisition? About 18 months? Building Cornerstone into a position where this was possible? 8 years. 8 years of plotting against your own family, Claire said bitterly. I shook my head. 8 years of building something I could be proud of. Something that valued talent and innovation. The acquisition opportunity arose because Harvest's financial performance has declined significantly under your leadership. Claire flinched as if I'd slapped her. We've had challenging market conditions. The pandemic affected all of us, I interrupted calmly. Cornerstone grew 30% during that period because we'd already developed digital solutions and contactless delivery systems. We anticipated industry trends rather than reacting to them. My father's expression had changed from shock to something more contemplative. You've done well, he conceded reluctantly. Better than I expected. Better than you believed possible, I corrected. That's why we're here today. He nodded slowly, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. So what happens now? You fire us and take over? That depends on you. Claire, your position as president will be eliminated, redundant with our current structure. I turned to my father. As for you, the board has suggested a ceremonial role as chairman emeritus. No operational responsibilities, but it preserves the family connection to the company you founded. Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I'm not staying to be humiliated. That's your choice, I said evenly. Your severance package is generous. More generous than what you would have offered me if our positions were reversed. She gathered her things, hands trembling slightly. Dad, are you coming? My father remained seated, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'd like to speak with Emma alone. Claire hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Fine, I'll be in my office. She paused at the door. For however long I still have one. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. Silence stretched between us. Outside, through the windows, I could see the Minneapolis skyline. The same view. I'd admired as a young executive dreaming of leading this company. Now I owned it, along with something much larger I'd built myself. You've changed, my father said finally. I had to. I suppose you hate me. His voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by a weary resignation. I don't hate you, Dad. I outgrew you. There's a difference. He winced but didn't argue. I made a mistake, pushing you aside for Claire. I see that now. Now that I've bought your company, that's a convenient time for this realization. No, he said quietly. I knew it within 6 months. Claire had vision, but not execution. not your attention to detail or your understanding of the industry." He rubbed his temples, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. But my pride. I couldn't admit I was wrong. Not to the board, not to Claire, and certainly not to you. I felt a complicated surge of emotions, vindication mixed with an unexpected softening. You never reached out, all these years. Would you have answered if I had? I considered this honestly. Probably not at first. Later, maybe. He nodded, accepting this. I followed your success with Cornerstone, read every article, heard about every innovation. Some of the proudest moments of my life were reading about what you'd accomplished. You never said anything. Like I said, pride. He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Seems to run in the family. I allowed myself a small smile in return. Some traits are hereditary. A knock at the door interrupted. Megan poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but we're scheduled to address the Harvest employees in 15 minutes. Thank you, Megan. I'll be right there. After she left, I turned back to my father. We should wrap this up. He straightened, businesslike once. More. The chairman emeritus position. What would it entail exactly? Quarterly board meetings, industry events where your presence would be valuable, mentoring promising employees if you're interested, no day-to-day responsibilities. And I'd report to you. Technically to the board, but yes, ultimately to me as CEO. He nodded slowly. Life has a sense of irony, doesn't it? Sometimes it delivers exactly the lessons we need. My father extended his hand across the table. I accept the position, Ms. Andrews. I took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses formed from decades in the industry we both loved. Welcome to Cornerstone, Mr. Andrews. We walked together to the company auditorium where Harvest's employees had gathered, anxiety palpable in the air. Many had been through acquisitions before. They knew jobs could be lost, roles eliminated, entire departments restructured out of existence. I took the stage alone, surveying the faces before me. Some familiar, many new, all uncertain about their futures. Good afternoon. For those who don't know me, I'm Emma Andrews, CEO of Cornerstone Restaurant Solutions. Many years ago, I was also COO of Harvest, working alongside many of you to build the company that attracted our interest. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I continued, my voice steady and clear. Let me address the most immediate concern. This acquisition is not about downsizing or eliminating positions. It's about growth. Cornerstone and Harvest have complementary strengths, customer bases, and supplier relationships. Together, we're positioned to become the industry leader in restaurant supply and solutions across North America. I outlined our vision for integration, emphasizing new opportunities for advancement, expanded benefits, and our commitment to maintaining Harvest's presence in Minneapolis. By the time I finished, the tension in the room had noticeably dissipated, replaced by cautious optimism. Change can be unsettling, I concluded, but I believe this change will benefit all of us. My door is open to any of you with questions or concerns during this transition. During the Q&A that followed, I noticed Claire slipping out a side door, her expression unreadable. My father remained in the front row, watching with what looked like grudging admiration as I fielded questions with confidence and transparency. Qualities he had once dismissed in me, but now witnessed in full bloom. Afterward, as the room cleared, Teresa Blackwell approached me. Now in her 60s, she had been head of accounting when I worked at Harvest and had been a quiet mentor to me during those years. Emma, she said warmly, embracing me. Or should I say Ms. Andrews now that you're the big boss? I laughed, returning her hug. It's still Emma to you, Teresa. Always. She stepped back, appraising me with knowing eyes. When I heard Cornerstone was the buyer, I hoped it might be you behind it. There's a certain beautiful symmetry to all this. Not revenge, if that's what you're thinking. No, not revenge. Restoration. She glanced toward where my father was speaking with members of my transition team. You were always the heart of this company, Emma. Even after you left, your systems, your processes, your philosophy, they kept us going. Without those, Harvest would have collapsed years ago. I felt a rush of affection for this woman who had seen my potential when others hadn't. Thank you for saying that. It's just truth. She squeezed my arm. I'm retiring next month, but I'm glad I stayed long enough to see this, to see you come full circle. As the afternoon progressed, I made my way through the building, reacquainting myself with spaces and people. In what had been Claire's office, soon to be repurposed, I found her packing personal items into a cardboard box. She looked up as I entered, her expression hardening. Come to gloat? I've never been the gloating type. No, you're the patient, calculating type. Planning and waiting for years until you could swoop in and take everything. I leaned against the doorframe, studying my sister. For all her polished exterior, Claire had always been transparent emotionally, a quality our father had found. Charming in his daughter, but problematic in his executives. I didn't take anything, Claire. I built something better, and then acquired what you and Dad couldn't maintain. There's a difference. She slammed a framed photo into the box. Easy for you to say from the winner's circle. You think I won something? Dad offered you the presidency on a silver platter. You had everything handed to you that I had to fight for. The fact that you couldn't make it work isn't my responsibility. I tried, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I really tried, Emma. But it was always, when Emma was here, and Emma's system, and Emma would have handled this differently. How was I supposed to compete with your ghost? For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine sympathy for my sister. She'd been set up for failure, placed in a role she wasn't prepared for, compared constantly to someone with years of industry experience. You weren't supposed to compete with me, Claire. You were supposed to find your own path. Dad didn't want a different path. He wanted another you. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? He pushed you away because he thought I could be a better version of you, and now you're back as an even more successful version of yourself. I moved further into the office, perching on the edge of her desk. For what it's worth, I think Dad did you a disservice. You have talents, real ones, but they were never going to flourish here. She looked at me skeptically. Is this the part where you offer me some token position at Cornerstone to ease your conscience? Would you take it if I did? God, no. She almost smiled. I'd rather start over somewhere without the Andrews family drama. That's probably wise. Claire hesitated, then asked, how did you do it? Start over? Build something so successful? One day at a time, with a clear vision and a lot of hard work. I stood, straightening my blazer. You have those qualities, too, Claire, just not in this industry. For a moment, something like respect flickered in her eyes. Then she resumed packing. Well, congratulations on your victory. I hope it brings you everything you wanted. It already has. I paused, at the door. And Claire, for what it's worth, I never wanted to compete with you either. Dad created that dynamic between us. She nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. By evening, I had completed my initial tour of Harvest's facilities, met with key department heads, and begun the process of integration. As the building emptied for the day, I found myself drawn to my father's office, the same office where I'd resigned 8 years ago, determined to forge my own path. He was still there, organizing files, when I knocked on the open door. Got a minute? I asked. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. It's your company now. You can have as many minutes as you want. I sat, taking in the familiar surroundings. The office had barely changed. Same heavy desk, same view of the city, same framed photo of my grandfather on the wall. Only my father looked different. Older, wearier, humbled. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," I began. "About pride preventing you from reaching out." He nodded, waiting for me to continue. "I understand that better than you might think. There were times I considered calling, especially after Mom told me about your heart surgery 3 years ago. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. We're too much alike," he said with a rueful smile. "Always have been. That's why we clashed. And why we worked so well together when we weren't clashing." He looked surprised at this acknowledgement. "You think we worked well together? The numbers don't lie, Dad. Harvest's most successful years were when we were both here, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses, before you decided one Andrews was dispensable." He winced. "I deserve that." "Yes, you did." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his desk. "But that's in the past now. What matters is where we go from here." "Where do we go? You're the boss now. I'm just the figurehead chairman emeritus. That's up to you. You can coast into retirement with a nice title and minimal responsibilities, or you can contribute meaningfully to the company's future. There's still value in your experience, Dad. I've never denied that." He studied me for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Cornerstone may be my creation, but I didn't build it by discarding valuable resources." The implied comparison to his treatment of me hung in the air between us. He nodded slowly, accepting the subtle rebuke. "I'd like to contribute, if you'll have me." "Good." I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "The transition team will brief you on next steps. We'll announce the chairman emeritus position at the formal press conference next week." As I reached the door, he called after me. "Emma?" I turned back. "Yes? I'm proud of you, not just for this acquisition, but for everything you've built. I should have said it years ago, but I'm saying it now." The words I'd once longed to hear washed over me, meaningful, but no longer essential to my sense of self-worth. "Thank you, Dad. That means something, even now." I left him there, surrounded by the remnants of his diminished kingdom, and made my way through the quiet building to the lobby. Outside, Minneapolis was transitioning from day to evening, the setting sun gilding the skyline in amber and gold. My driver was waiting, but I found myself reluctant to leave just yet. "I think I'll walk for a bit, David. You can meet me at Riverside Park in half an hour." "Of course, Ms. Andrews." I set off down the familiar streets, retracing paths I'd walked countless times during my years at Harvest. Past the bistro where I'd held my first successful client dinner. Past the small park where I'd sat during lunch breaks, sketching plans for what would become our e-commerce platform. Past the coffee shop where I'd consoled employees during difficult transitions. This city held my history, both the painful chapters and the triumphant ones. Today had closed a circle that began 8 years ago when I walked out of Harvest determined to prove my worth. I had done that and more, building something that surpassed what I had lost, and ultimately reclaiming what had been taken from me. Yet standing here now, with Harvest officially part of Cornerstone and my father acknowledging what he should have seen years ago, I felt no overwhelming sense of victory. Instead, I experienced something quieter and more profound, a sense of completion, of rightness. My phone buzzed with a message from Megan. "Transition team reports all going smoothly. First day integration success. Celebratory drinks at the IA Foundry? Team's already gathering." I smiled and texted back, "On my way." As I changed direction toward the upscale restaurant where my team waited, I realized that the most meaningful part of today's achievement wasn't acquiring Harvest or proving my father wrong. It was the community I'd built along the way, the people who had believed in my vision, who had taken risks to join a startup, who had contributed their talents to building something extraordinary. My father had once told me that business was about assets and strategy, numbers and market share. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he'd missed something crucial. The greatest businesses were built on relationships, on recognizing and nurturing talent, on creating environments where innovation flourished and people felt valued. That was the true difference between us. He had seen me as an asset, useful, until a presumably better option came along. I had built Cornerstone by seeing the human potential in everyone, including those Harvest had undervalued. As I approached the foundry, I could see my team through the windows, raising glasses in celebration. Marcus caught sight of me first, nudging Megan, who turned with a brilliant smile and raised her glass higher. They had been with me from the beginning, believing in my vision when it was nothing more than ambitious plans and determination. I pushed through the door into the warm, convivial atmosphere, greeted by cheers and congratulations. This moment, surrounded by the people who had helped build Cornerstone from nothing into an industry leader, felt like the true culmination of the journey that began when I walked away from Harvest. "A toast," Marcus called out as I joined them, to Emma Andrews, who showed us all what leadership really means. As glasses clinked and voices echoed the sentiment, I felt a profound gratitude for the path that had brought me here. Even the painful parts. My father's rejection had forced me to discover strengths I might never have known otherwise. Claire's unearned promotion had freed me to build something truly my own. Sometimes I reflected as I raised my glass to join the toast. What seems like our greatest defeat becomes the catalyst for our most meaningful victory, not through revenge or vindication, but through the discovery of who we truly are when everything we thought we wanted is taken away. To Cornerstone, I countered, including everyone in my toast, and to all of you who built it with me. Today isn't my triumph, it's ours. And in that moment, surrounded by the team that had become a kind of family, I knew with absolute certainty that I had gained far more than I had ever lost. The celebratory atmosphere at the foundry continued late into the evening, but I excused myself shortly after 10, mindful of the significant work that lay ahead in the coming days. The acquisition was complete, but the real challenge of integration was just beginning. "Don't stay too late," I cautioned my executive team as I gathered my things. "Tomorrow starts the actual work." "Always the responsible one," Marcus teased, though his eyes held a serious appreciation. Some things never change. Outside, the Minneapolis evening had turned cool, stars barely visible above the city lights. David was waiting with the car, discreetly checking his watch as I approached. "Home, Ms. Andrews." "Yes, please." As we drove through the quiet streets, I scrolled through my emails, addressing the most urgent ones. The business press had already caught wind of the acquisition, and requests for interviews were flooding in. The story was irresistible. Daughter buys father's company after being passed over for leadership. Financial journalists wanted to dissect the business strategy. Women's business magazines wanted to frame it as a feminist triumph. Family business publications wanted to explore the dynamics of succession gone wrong. I forwarded them all to our PR director with brief notes on which to prioritize. The narrative around this acquisition would be important, but I was determined to keep it focused on the business rationale rather than family drama. My penthouse apartment welcomed me, with quiet elegance, modern furnishings, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city lights, and blessed silence. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of Cabernet, and stepped onto the terrace, letting the day's tensions begin to dissolve in the night air. My phone rang. My mother. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." Emma. Her voice held a complex mixture of emotions. "Your father told me everything." "Did he?" I took a sip of wine. "And what's your take on all this?" "I'm processing." A pause. "It's quite something, what you've built with Cornerstone. I always knew you were capable, but this is extraordinary. Thank you." Your father is stunned, humbled, I think. He's been very quiet since he came home. I waited, saying nothing. He told me about the chairman emeritus position, that you're keeping him involved. It makes business sense, I said carefully. His experience has value. Is that the only reason? I sighed, leaning against the terrace railing. What do you want me to say, Mom? That I did it out of family loyalty? After what happened? No, she said quietly. I know better than that. I hope there might be room for healing now. This isn't a Hallmark movie. Business decisions aren't about healing family rifts. Emma, but, I continued, softening my tone, I'm not opposed to the possibility. It just isn't my priority. Right now. She seemed to accept this. And Claire? Your father said she didn't take it well. Claire was put in a position she wasn't prepared for. That's on Dad, not her. She'll land on her feet. I hope you're right. My mother sounded tired. This family has been fractured for too long. After we hung up, I remained on the terrace, contemplating the complicated web of family, business, and personal growth that had brought me to this point. My mother had always been the peacemaker, trying to smooth over the conflicts between my father and me, attempting to bridge the competitive divide he'd created between Claire and me. She'd been unsuccessful, but not for lack of trying. The next morning, I arrived at Harvest, now officially the Harvest division of Cornerstone Restaurant Solutions, by 7. I wanted time to settle in before the integration meetings began. The security guard did a double take when I used my new access card, clearly not yet accustomed to seeing me in the building. Morning, Ms. Andrews. You're in early. Lots to do, Carl. Is anyone else in yet? Just Mr. Andrews, your father, he clarified unnecessarily. Been here since 6. That was unexpected. During my years at Harvest, my father had rarely arrived. Before 9, delegating early morning responsibilities to his executive team, primarily to me. I found him in the main conference room, spreading documents across the table, sleeves rolled up and reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as I entered, momentarily startled. Emma, good morning. You're here early, I observed, setting my laptop on the table. Thought I'd get a head start on organizing these European supplier contracts. Bit of a mess, I'm afraid. Claire never had your eye for detail. I nodded, unzipping my computer bag. I appreciate the initiative. He straightened, removing his glasses. I meant what I said yesterday. I want to contribute meaningfully. You're giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. Everyone deserves a chance to do what they're good at, I replied, powering up my laptop. Even when they've made mistakes. A shadow of acknowledgement crossed his face. Fair enough. We worked in surprisingly companionable silence for the next hour, organizing materials for the day's meetings. It felt oddly familiar, reminiscent of early mornings years ago when we'd collaborated on expansion strategies before Claire entered the picture and everything changed. By 8:30, the building was humming with activity. Megan arrived with our integration team, followed by Harvest's department heads. The real work of combining two substantial companies began in earnest. The first week was a blur of meetings, presentations, employee interviews, and system evaluations. I split my time between Harvest and Cornerstone headquarters, ensuring both operations continued smoothly during the transition. Claire made herself scarce, coming in only to clear out her office and have exit interviews with HR. My father, to his credit, threw himself into his advisory role with unexpected energy, helping identify key relationships that needed special attention during the changeover. By Friday afternoon, I was reviewing staffing recommendations in what had been my father's office, now temporarily mine while at the Harvest location, when Teresa knocked on the open door. "Got a minute?" she asked, a folder tucked under her arm. "For you?" "Always." She closed the door behind her, an uncharacteristically serious expression on her face. "There's something you should see." She placed the folder on my desk and opened it to reveal financial statements and internal reports. "What am I looking at?" I asked, scanning the documents. "Proof that Claire was cooking the books." Teresa's voice was low, even though we were alone. "She's been inflating revenue figures for the past 3 years, shifting expenses between quarters to make performance look better than it was." I felt a chill run through me as I examined the evidence more carefully. Teresa had meticulously documented discrepancies, highlighted inconsistencies, and mapped a pattern of financial misrepresentation that was subtle but unmistakable. "How long have you known?" "Suspected for about 2 years. Confirmed it 6. Months ago when she bypassed me to hire an outside accountant for the quarterly filings. I've been quietly gathering evidence since then." "Why didn't you report this to the board?" Teresa sighed, sitting down across from me. "Your father was on the board. And though we never discussed it, I think he knew, or at least suspected. He was back in the office full-time by then, desperately trying to right the ship. I think he was hoping to fix things before anyone found out how bad it really was." I leaned back in my chair, processing this new information. The financial due diligence team had flagged some irregularities, but nothing of this magnitude. We'd attributed the discrepancies to sloppy bookkeeping during leadership transition, not deliberate misrepresentation. "This could have legal implications," I said finally. "For Claire, for Dad, for Harvest's former board members." "I know." Teresa looked troubled. "That's why I brought it to you first. What are you going to do?" It was a fair question. The revelation complicated an already complex situation. If made public, this could trigger investigations, lawsuits from shareholders, and potentially criminal charges. It would certainly destroy any possibility of the family reconciliation my mother hoped for. "Let me think about this." I closed the folder. "Thank you for bringing it to me, Teresa. I know that couldn't have been easy." "You've always done the right thing, Emma. Even when it was difficult. That's why I trusted you with this." After she left, I sat motionless, staring out the window at the city skyline. The evidence in that folder had the power to permanently destroy what remained of my family. It could also significantly complicate the acquisition if it led to regulatory scrutiny or lawsuits. From a purely business perspective, the cleanest approach would be to quietly correct the accounting issues during integration, enhance internal controls, and move forward without public disclosure. Many acquiring companies had done the same when discovering skeletons in their new subsidiaries' closets. But there was also the matter of principle, of accountability, of the message it would send if such behavior went unaddressed. My contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. My father entered without waiting for a response, an old habit he apparently hadn't broken. "Emma, I've been reviewing the Chicago Distribution Center operations, and I think we've been underestimating its—" He stopped abruptly, noticing my expression. "What's wrong?" I considered deflecting, then decided against it. "Close the door, Dad." He complied, moving cautiously to sit across from me. "You look like you did when you were 16 and caught me reading your journal. What's happened?" Without speaking, I pushed Teresa's folder across the desk to him. He opened it, scanning the first few pages with growing consternation. As understanding dawned, his face paled. "Where did you get this? Does it matter? Is it accurate?" He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Yes," he admitted after a long pause. "It's accurate." "You knew." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Not at first. By the time I figured it out, we were already in too deep. Claire had been reporting inflated numbers to the board, to our banking partners, to everyone. If we suddenly came clean, it would have meant bankruptcy, layoffs, possibly worse." So you became complicit, helped cover it up. I was trying to buy time to fix it. His voice rose defensively. To gradually correct course without destroying everything my father built, everything you helped grow. He gestured helplessly. Then you came along with this acquisition offer, and it seemed like divine intervention, a way out with minimal collateral damage. I studied him. This man I'd both admired and resented for so much of my life. He looked diminished, the weight of his failures evident in his slumped shoulders and troubled eyes. Did the board know when they approved the sale? No, at least I don't think so. Some may have suspected, but no one wanted to ask too many questions about a generous acquisition offer. It was a lifeline none of us expected. I stood and walked to the window, needing physical distance to think clearly. The revelation cast the entire acquisition in a new light. Harvest hadn't just been underperforming, it had been actively misrepresenting its financial condition. Our valuation, our integration plans, our projections, all were based partly on fraudulent data. Who else knows? I asked without turning around. Claire, obviously. The outside accountant she hired, though I doubt he understood the full picture. He was just following orders. Maybe Teresa, given that she compiled this evidence. And now me. I turned back to face him, which leaves us with a significant problem. He stared at his hands, looking every bit his age. What are you going to do? It was the second time I'd been asked that question in the past hour. The weight of the decision pressed upon me, not just as CEO of Cornerstone, but as a daughter, a sister, a leader being watched by hundreds of employees. I haven't decided yet. Emma, I need time to think, Dad, and I need to consult with our legal team. Hypothetically, of course. This isn't a decision I can make unilaterally. He nodded, standing slowly. I understand. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was protecting our legacy. After he left, I called Olivia, asking her to meet me for dinner at a discreet restaurant across town. If anyone could help me navigate the legal and ethical minefield I now faced, it was the friend who had helped me build Cornerstone from the ground up. Olivia arrived at the restaurant precisely on time, as always. After we ordered and ensured our conversation wouldn't be overheard, I explained the situation in detail. She listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. This is serious, Emma, she said finally. Securities fraud, falsification of financial records, misrepresentation to shareholders. If this became public, it wouldn't just be bad PR. We're talking potential criminal charges. I'm aware. And as the acquiring company, Cornerstone could face liability too, especially if you know about these issues and don't address them properly. I nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. So, what are my options? Olivia considered, carefully before answering. Legally speaking, you have three main paths. 1. Full disclosure. Report everything to the SEC, cooperate with any investigation, and publicly correct all financial statements. This would likely mean criminal charges for Claire at minimum, possibly your father as well. Not ideal, I murmured. 2. Middle ground. Correct the financial statements and implement proper controls going forward, but frame it as accounting irregularities discovered during integration, rather than deliberate fraud. This might avoid criminal charges, but could still trigger shareholder lawsuits. And the third option? Quiet burial. Fix the issues internally, enhance controls, but don't make any public admission of past problems. Many companies take this approach, especially when the fraud happened under previous management. It's legally risky, but sometimes works. I sipped my wine, weighing these unappealing alternatives. What would you do? Olivia leaned forward. As your attorney, I'd recommend the middle option. Protect Cornerstone while demonstrating good faith effort to correct past issues. As your friend. She hesitated, this is about more than legal liability for you, isn't it? It's about family. It shouldn't be, I said firmly. This is business. Emma, everything about this acquisition has been personal as well as professional. You can't pretend otherwise. The question is, what kind of leader, what kind of person do you want to be in this moment? It was the right question, and one I grappled with throughout the weekend. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called a meeting with key stakeholders, my executive team, our legal counsel, and my father in his capacity as chairman emeritus. Claire was conspicuously absent by design. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began once everyone was seated. What I'm about to share is highly confidential and requires immediate action. I outlined the accounting irregularities that had been discovered, careful to use neutral language that neither explicitly accused anyone nor minimized the seriousness of the situation. Our priority must be threefold, I continued as shocked murmurs subsided. First, to correct all financial reporting and ensure complete accuracy going forward. Second, to implement enhanced controls that prevent similar issues in the future. And third, to determine the appropriate disclosure strategy that protects Cornerstone while meeting our legal and ethical obligations. My father sat silently, his expression unreadable. The rest of the team engaged in spirited discussion of next steps, with our legal counsel advocating for a conservative approach that would shield the company while demonstrating good governance. By meeting's end, we had a clear action plan. A specialized team would be formed to review and correct all financial statements from the past 3 years. Enhanced controls would be implemented immediately. And we would prepare a carefully worded disclosure to be released after the review was complete, acknowledging accounting irregularities discovered during post-acquisition integration, without assigning blame or admitting to fraud. As the room cleared, my father remained seated, waiting until we were alone to speak. "You're being more merciful than I expected," he said quietly. "This isn't about mercy," I replied, gathering my notes. "It's about making the right decision, for Cornerstone, for Harvest's employees, and for the business we're building together." "And for Claire? For me?" I met his gaze directly. "I'm not doing this to protect either of you, but I won't destroy you unnecessarily either. The path I've chosen addresses the problems without creating new ones." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you anyway. There's one condition," I added, my voice hardening slightly. "Claire needs to understand the gravity of what she did and the consequences she's being spared. I want to meet with her, privately. She's barely speaking to any of us right now. I doubt she'll agree. Make it happen, Dad, or my merciful approach might change." 2 days later, Claire arrived at my office at Cornerstone headquarters. She looked defensive from the moment she walked in, arms crossed and jaw set. "Dad said you wanted to see me. Something about future opportunities?" "Sit down, Claire." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "We need to have a frank conversation." She complied reluctantly. "If this is some kind of gloating session, it's not." I opened a folder identical to the one Teresa had given me. "This is about accounting fraud, securities violations, and potential criminal liability." Her face drained of color as I laid out the evidence before her. To her credit, she didn't attempt to deny it. "How long have you known?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough to have made some decisions about how to handle it." I closed the folder. "I've chosen a path that corrects the issues without explicitly assigning blame. No criminal charges, no public humiliation." Claire stared at me in disbelief. "Why would you do that? This is your perfect opportunity to destroy me completely." "Contrary to what you might think, that's never been my goal." I leaned forward. "But I need you to understand something, Claire. What you did wasn't just unethical and illegal. It was a betrayal of every employee who trusted you, every supplier who extended credit, every customer who relied on Harvest's stability. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm not protecting you because you deserve protection," I continued. "I'm choosing this path because it's best for the hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on a smooth transition and a stable company." "So what happens now?" she asked, voice small. "You'll be asked to sign a confidential settlement agreement acknowledging the issues without admitting criminal wrongdoing. You'll agree to cooperate if any issues arise in the future, and you'll step away completely from Harvest and Cornerstone." She nodded slowly. "That's more than fair." "It is," I agreed. "But there's one more thing. A personal request, not a legal requirement." Claire looked up, wary. "What?" "Find what you're actually good at, Claire. What you love. Stop trying to be someone you're not just to please Dad or compete with me. I was never your enemy. You have talents, real ones. But they were wasted at Harvest because they weren't the right fit." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I'd been close to as a child before our father's expectations drove us apart. Vulnerable, thoughtful, creative in ways different from my practical focus. "I've been offered a position with an art gallery in Boston," she said hesitantly, "curating their contemporary collection. It's what my degree was in before the MBA. Dad pushed me toward. That sounds perfect for you." "You really think so?" The need for validation in her voice was palpable. "I do. You always had an eye for emerging talent, even when we were kids." She smiled faintly. "I did, didn't I?" She stood, seemingly lighter than when she'd entered. "Thank you, Emma. Not just for this, but for..." She gestured vaguely. "For seeing me. The real me." After she left, I remained at my desk, reflecting on the ironies of our family dynamics. For years, I'd believed my father couldn't see my true value. In reality, he'd recognized it all too well. My operational skills, my strategic thinking, my ability to build and grow a business. He'd counted on those qualities, depended on them, while simultaneously denying me the recognition and advancement I deserved. With Claire, the pattern had been reversed. He'd projected onto her abilities she didn't possess, pushed her toward roles that didn't fit her natural talents, and set her up for failure while believing he was giving her an opportunity. In both cases, he'd failed to see his daughters clearly, not because he couldn't, but because his own needs and expectations had clouded his vision. As for me, I'd spent years defining myself in opposition to my father's perception, determined to prove him wrong about what I could achieve. In the process, I'd built something extraordinary, a company that embodied my values, my vision, and my approach to leadership. The acquisition of Harvest hadn't been about revenge after all. It had been about coming full circle, about demonstrating, not just to my father, but to myself, that I had always been capable of everything he'd doubted. That the strength, innovation, and leadership I'd brought to Cornerstone had always been within me, waiting for the right circumstances to flourish. Now, with both companies under my direction and the accounting issues being addressed, I could focus on the future, not on settling old scores or nursing past wounds, but on building something that would outlast all of us. A legacy defined not by family drama, but by excellence, integrity, and vision. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "First integrated. Team meeting in 30 minutes. New product development. You coming?" I smiled, typing back a quick response. Wouldn't miss it. Gathering my things, I headed toward the conference room where tomorrow was waiting to be shaped, one decision at a time. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of integration activities, system upgrades, and organizational restructuring. The merging of Harvest and Cornerstone progressed more smoothly than anyone had anticipated, owing largely to the cultural groundwork we'd established and the meticulous planning of our transition team. The accounting issues had been addressed with minimal disruption. Our carefully worded disclosure about accounting irregularities discovered during post-acquisition review had generated some industry buzz but no serious fallout. The correction of past statements had been positioned as a demonstration of Cornerstone's commitment to transparency and governance, a messaging strategy that had actually enhanced our reputation among institutional clients concerned with ethical business practices. On a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after the acquisition, I stood at the podium in our newly renovated conference center, addressing the combined leadership teams of what was now simply Cornerstone Restaurant Solutions. The Harvest name had been respectfully retired during our recent rebranding, preserved only in our legacy product line, now marketed as Harvest Classics. Today marks not just the official completion of our integration process, I told the assembled executives, but the beginning of a new chapter for Cornerstone. The past 6 months have proven what I believed from the start, that by combining our strengths, we could create something greater than the sum of our parts. The data on screen behind me supported this assertion. Overall revenue was up 22%, compared to the pre-acquisition projections. Employee retention had exceeded expectations at 94%, with particularly strong numbers among the technical and customer-facing teams. Our client satisfaction metrics showed improvement across all business segments. These results didn't happen by accident, I continued, making eye contact with key team members throughout the room. They represent thousands of hours of hard work, creative problem-solving, and genuine collaboration from everyone in this room and beyond. From his seat in the front row, my father nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable a year ago. His role as chairman emeritus had evolved over the months from largely ceremonial to genuinely valuable. His deep industry relationships and historical knowledge had proven useful during delicate client transitions, and his willingness to support rather than direct had earned him new respect from the executive team. As we move forward, I concluded, our focus shifts from integration to innovation. The strategic initiatives we'll discuss today represent our roadmap for the next 3 years, a vision for how Cornerstone will not just lead our industry, but transform it. The meeting that followed was energizing, with team members from both original companies contributing ideas, challenging assumptions, and building on each other's insights. The territorial divisions that had marked our early integration meetings had dissolved, replaced by a unified sense of purpose and possibility. Afterward, as the room cleared, Marcus approached with a tablet displaying a news alert. "Have you seen this?" I scanned the headline. Claire Andrews named Executive Director of Boston Contemporary Arts Foundation. "Good for her," I said genuinely. "That's a perfect fit." "She mentions you in the interview," Marcus noted, scrolling down to highlight a quote. "My sister Emma taught me the importance of finding your authentic path rather than following someone else's blueprint for your life. Her success came from building something aligned with her unique strengths. I'm finally doing the same." I smiled, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. Claire and I had spoken only occasionally since our confrontation about the accounting issues, but each conversation had been increasingly cordial. She seemed happier in Boston, flourishing in the arts world where her natural talents were valued. "Everything okay?" My father's voice interrupted my thoughts as he joined us. "More than okay," I replied, showing him Claire's news. "She's found her place." His expression softened as he read the article. "She sounds happy, confident." "She does. Both my daughters excelling in their chosen fields." He shook his head with a rueful smile. "Turns out the best thing I did for either of you was get out of your way." "Not entirely true," I countered, surprising myself with the generosity. "You built the foundation we both started from. You just needed to let us build different structures on it." As Marcus excused himself to prepare for the next session, my father lingered, seemingly wanting to say more. "Something on your mind, Dad?" He hesitated, then asked, "Do you have time for lunch? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, in private." Curious, I agreed, and an hour later we were seated at a quiet table in Alessandra's, an upscale Italian restaurant near the office. After ordering, My father reached into his briefcase and removed a worn leather portfolio I recognized immediately. One my grandfather had carried throughout his business career, later passed to my father when he took over Harvest. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, placing the portfolio on the table between us. "About legacy, about the future, about what matters when you reach my age." I waited, knowing from experience that my father worked through important thoughts at his own pace. When your grandfather started Harvest, he had nothing but determination and a small loan from his brother. He built that business through 2 recessions, countless setbacks, and more all-nighters than any of us could count. He ran his hand over the portfolio's weathered surface. He gave it to me when I took over, telling me it contained everything I needed to know about running a successful business. "I remember you showing it to me once," I said. "His original business plan, client notes, financial records from the early days." He nodded. "And something else, something I never showed you." He opened the portfolio and carefully extracted a yellowed envelope, handing it to me. "Read it." Inside was a handwritten letter dated April 1978, the month before my grandfather passed away and my father assumed full control of Harvest. Written in my grandfather's distinctive scrawl, it offered advice and wisdom accumulated over decades in business. One passage in particular caught my attention. "Remember, William, that a business is not buildings or inventory or even profit margins. It's people, the ones who work alongside you, the ones who trust you with their livelihoods, the ones who believe in your vision enough to help build it. The moment you forget that, you begin to fail, no matter what the balance sheet says." I looked up from the letter, finding my father watching me intently. "He was right," my father said quietly. "And I forgot." Somewhere along the way, I started measuring success by numbers alone, by growth charts and market share. I forgot about the people, including my own daughters. "Dad, you don't have to— Please, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I've spent months watching you lead the combined company, seeing how you balance the analytical and the human elements of business, how you make decisions that aren't just strategically sound, but also honor people's contributions and potential." He gestured to the portfolio. "You embody everything my father tried to teach me, everything I lost sight of." He pushed the portfolio across the table toward me. "This belongs to you now, not because you acquired Harvest, but because you've proven yourself the true heir to my father's philosophy of business." The gesture moved me in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just a symbolic passing of a family artifact. It was my father's acknowledgement that I had built something worthy of our family's legacy, something that honored its best traditions while evolving beyond its limitations. "Thank you," I said simply, running my fingers over the worn leather. "I'll treasure it." "There's something else." He seemed uncharacteristically nervous now. "A proposition I'd like you to consider." "I'm listening." The chairman emeritus role has been fulfilling, more than I expected. Working with clients, mentoring some of the younger managers. It's reminded me of what I loved about the business before I got caught up in titles and corner offices. I nodded encouragingly. "I've been thinking about how to make a more meaningful contribution going forward, and I have an idea I'd like your thoughts on." He outlined a vision for a Cornerstone legacy program, an initiative that would pair experienced industry veterans, including himself, with promising employees to cultivate leadership and innovation, while preserving institutional knowledge. It would create structured mentorship opportunities, documentation of best practices, and a framework for identifying and developing internal talent, he explained, growing animated as he elaborated on the concept. I listened with growing interest and a touch of amazement. The program he described aligned perfectly with our strategic objectives around talent development and succession planning, areas we'd identified as critical for sustaining our growth trajectory. "This is excellent, Dad," I said when he'd finished. It addresses several challenges we've been discussing at the executive level. You think it has merit? Absolutely. In fact, I pulled out my tablet and made some quick notes. I'd like you to present this concept at our strategic planning session next week. With your permission, I'll have Megan coordinate with you on developing it into a formal proposal. The look of surprised pleasure on his face reminded me of how rarely I'd offered him unqualified approval in recent years. I'd be honored to present it. As our lunch concluded and we walked back toward the office, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. 8 years ago, I had walked away from Harvest feeling betrayed and undervalued. Today, I led a company that had surpassed my most ambitious early projections, with my father now serving as a contributor to, rather than an obstacle to, my vision. The irony wasn't lost on me. If he hadn't passed me over for Claire, I might never have built Cornerstone. If I hadn't been forced to prove myself independently, I might never have discovered the depths of my capabilities. His greatest failure as a father had inadvertently catalyzed my greatest success as an entrepreneur. Back at the office, I placed my grandfather's portfolio on my desk, intending to explore its contents more thoroughly that evening. Before I could, however, Megan appeared in my doorway, tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but we just received a rather unusual acquisition offer. I think you'll want to see this immediately. She handed me the tablet displaying an email from Dominic Renault, CEO of European restaurant supply giant Renault Hospitality Solutions. I scanned it quickly, eyebrows rising as I absorbed the details. Renault was proposing a merger that would create the largest restaurant supply and solutions company in the Western Hemisphere, with Cornerstone maintaining operational independence while gaining access to Renault's extensive European infrastructure. This is unexpected, I murmured, reviewing the preliminary valuation numbers, which were extraordinarily generous. They've clearly been watching our post-integration performance, Megan observed. The timing suggests they've been waiting for us to demonstrate successful combination of Cornerstone and Harvest before making their move. I nodded, mind already racing with implications, opportunities, and potential complications. Set up a call with Dominic for tomorrow morning, and let's convene the executive committee for a preliminary discussion this afternoon. After Megan left, I sat back in my chair, contemplating this unexpected development. The proposed merger represented both tremendous opportunity and significant challenge. Renault's European presence would accelerate our international expansion plans by years. Their technological infrastructure was complementary to ours. The cultural fit seemed promising based on their reputation for innovation and employee development. Yet I felt a surprising reluctance as I considered the proposal. I had built Cornerstone from nothing into an industry leader, guided it through the acquisition of my family's company, and was just beginning to implement our expanded vision. Was I prepared to potentially dilute that control by merging with a larger entity? The question lingered as I moved through afternoon meetings, reviewed quarterly projections, and briefed the executive committee on Renault's unexpected overture. By evening, when the office had quieted, I found myself drawn back to my grandfather's portfolio, still sitting where I'd placed it hours earlier. Opening it, I discovered not just the business documents I expected, but a personal journal chronicling my grandfather's entrepreneurial journey, his doubts, triumphs, strategic thinking, and philosophical reflections on leadership. I lost myself in his words, particularly those written during periods of significant decision-making about Harvest's direction. One entry from 1972 particularly resonated. Faced with opportunity to merge with National Supply today. Numbers make sense. Growth potential substantial. But something holds me back. A sense that what we've built here is special, precisely because it remains true to our founding vision. Not every company should become the biggest. Some should focus on becoming the best at what makes them unique. My grandfather had ultimately declined that merger opportunity, choosing instead to develop Harvest's distinctive approach to regional restaurant partnerships, a decision that had positioned the company for decades of sustainable growth. Was there wisdom in his choice that applied to our current situation? Or were the circumstances so different that his experience offered little guidance? I was still pondering these questions the next morning as I prepared for my call with Dominic Renault. At precisely 9 a.m., the video conference connected, revealing a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had built a business empire. "Ms. Andrews," he greeted me warmly in lightly accented English. "Thank you for taking my call. I've been following your work with great interest." "Mr. Renault, your proposal was certainly attention-grabbing. I'm curious what prompted it at this particular moment." He smiled appreciatively at my directness. "Two factors primarily. First, your successful integration of Harvest demonstrated exceptional leadership capability and organizational agility, qualities we value highly at Renault. Second, our strategic review identified North American expansion as our top priority, with build versus buy analysis strongly favoring partnership with an established innovator. And you see Cornerstone as that innovator?" "Without question. Your restaurant IQ platform alone represents a technological advantage we'd need years to develop independently. Combined with your customer relationships and market reputation, Cornerstone represents the ideal partnership opportunity." For the next hour, we discussed the broad contours of his proposal: governance structure, operational autonomy, growth targets, and cultural alignment. Dominic was clearly prepared, addressing potential concerns before I raised them and demonstrating genuine familiarity with Cornerstone's business model and philosophy. By call's end, I had to admit the opportunity was compelling. The proposed structure would preserve significant autonomy for Cornerstone while providing resources for accelerated growth. My role would expand to include global strategy development while maintaining direct operational control over North American business. "I'll need time to discuss this with my team and board," I told him as we prepared to conclude. "The proposal has merit, but there are many details to consider. Of course, take the time you need for proper evaluation. Good decisions are rarely made in haste." He paused, then added, "If I may make a personal observation, Ms. Andrews, please do. What you've built with Cornerstone is remarkable by any standard, but particularly impressive given the circumstances under which you began. Building a successful company is challenging enough without also overcoming family dynamics and gender bias in a traditionally male-dominated industry." I was surprised by his insight. "You've done your research. I make it a point to understand the leaders I hope to partner with, not just their business strategies, but their personal journeys. It tells me far more about what to expect from a relationship than any financial statement ever could." After the call ended, I remained at my desk, reflecting on Dominic's proposal and his surprising perceptiveness about my path to this moment. The merger opportunity was objectively excellent, financially sound, strategically aligned, structured to preserve what made Cornerstone special. Yet something held me back from immediate enthusiasm. A nagging question about what I truly wanted for the company I'd built and for myself as its leader. That evening, I invited Olivia to my penthouse for dinner and perspective. As both my attorney and my friend, she had a unique understanding of Cornerstone's journey and my personal stakes in its future. "Objectively speaking, it's an outstanding offer," she noted after reviewing the proposal details. "The valuation is generous. The governance structure respects your leadership role, and the growth potential is significant." "But," I prompted, sensing her reservation, "but you don't seem excited about it." She studied me over her wine glass. "Which makes me wonder what's holding you back." I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, searching for words to express my conflicted feelings. When I started Cornerstone, my motivation was partly to prove my father wrong, to show him and everyone else that I could build something successful on my own terms. Then as we grew, it became about creating an organization that embodied my values about business, leadership, and innovation. Olivia nodded encouragingly. Acquiring Harvest closed a circle in some ways. It validated the path I'd chosen and healed old wounds I didn't realize were still open. Now, just as I'm beginning to think about Cornerstone's next chapter, our international expansion, new product development, talent cultivation, Renault appears with this offer. And you're wondering if merging would compromise the independence that's been so central to your journey. Exactly. I turned back to face her. Would I be betraying what Cornerstone represents by becoming part of something larger? Or am I just clinging to control because it's become central to my identity? Olivia considered this thoughtfully. Maybe neither. Maybe it's simply that you haven't yet defined what success looks like for the next phase of Cornerstone and your own career. Without that North Star, it's hard to evaluate whether Renault's offer helps or hinders your ultimate objectives. Her insight resonated immediately. I hadn't articulated, even to myself, what I wanted Cornerstone to become in its maturity, or what role I envisioned for myself beyond CEO of the company I'd founded. That's it, I acknowledged. I've been so focused on building and growing that I haven't defined the destination clearly enough. So, before you decide about Renault, Olivia suggested, perhaps you need to answer some fundamental questions. What do you want Cornerstone's ultimate impact to be? What legacy do you want to create? And what role do you personally want to play in that future? These questions occupied my thoughts throughout the following week as I conducted ordinary business by day and contemplated Cornerstone's and my own future trajectory by night. I revisited my original business plan, reviewed my grandfather's journal entries, and reflected on lessons learned throughout our growth journey. Gradually, clarity emerged. I wanted Cornerstone to become not just financially successful, but transformative in its approach to restaurant supply and technology integration. I wanted to establish new standards for sustainability, ethical sourcing, and technological innovation that would influence the entire industry. And I wanted to build a talent development model that created opportunities for underrepresented groups in hospitality technology and management. Were these objectives better served by maintaining complete independence or by partnering with a global entity that could amplify our impact? The answer crystallized during a routine visit to our Chicago operations center. Walking the floor, I observed team members from both original companies, Cornerstone and Harvest, working seamlessly together, combining their distinct expertise to create solutions neither could have developed independently. In that moment, I understood that my focus on independence versus partnership had been misplaced. The real question was about impact and legacy, about creating something enduring that reflected my values while transcending my personal control. The next morning, I called a special meeting of our executive team and board to discuss Renault's proposal. After presenting a comprehensive analysis of the opportunity, I shared my personal perspective. When I founded Cornerstone, I was driven, partly by the need to prove myself after being overlooked at Harvest. That motivation served its purpose, but it's time to evolve beyond it. The question now isn't whether we maintain absolute independence, but how we maximize our impact on the industry we serve. I outlined my vision for Cornerstone's future, the innovations we could develop, the standards we could establish, the talent we could nurture. Renault's resources and European presence would accelerate this vision significantly. Their corporate values align with ours, and the proposed structure preserves our operational autonomy while providing global scale. After careful consideration, I believe this partnership represents the natural next stage in Cornerstone's evolution. The board discussion that followed was thoughtful and nuanced, exploring both opportunities and risks. By meeting's end, we had reached consensus to move forward with serious negotiations. contingent on specific terms that would protect Cornerstone's culture and ensure appropriate governance representation. 2 days later, I called Dominic Renault to convey our interest in proceeding. We see significant potential in this partnership, provided we can align on certain key principles regarding autonomy, innovation investment, and talent development. I'm delighted to hear it, he replied with evident satisfaction. I suspected you would recognize the strategic value once you'd had time for proper evaluation. Shall we plan for in-person discussions next month? I'd welcome the opportunity to visit your Minneapolis headquarters and see firsthand what you've built. That would be ideal. And I'd like to reciprocate with a visit to your European operations. Understanding your culture directly will be valuable as we shape this potential partnership. After concluding the call, I sat quietly in my office, reflecting on the path that had brought me to this juncture. From the devastated young woman who had walked away from Harvest 8 years ago, to the confident CEO now contemplating a global merger that would value Cornerstone at over $300 million, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable. Yet it hadn't happened overnight or by accident. It had unfolded one decision, one innovation, one team member at a time, built on vision, persistence, and a willingness to evolve beyond initial motivations towards something more meaningful and enduring. A knock at my door interrupted these reflections. My father stood there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a minute? I heard about the Renault discussions." "Come in," I invited, curious about his reaction. "News travels fast." "It's a good deal," he said, taking a seat across from me. "Strategically sound, financially attractive." "But," I prompted, hearing the reservation in his voice. "But, I'm concerned about what it means for you personally. You've poured everything into building Cornerstone. Are you ready to see it become part of something else?" I was touched by his concern, so different from the dismissive father who had once passed me over without a second thought. "I've given that a lot of thought," I assured him. "And I've realized something important. Cornerstone was never meant to be just my company. It was meant to be a vehicle for transforming how our industry operates, for creating opportunities for talented people, for establishing new standards of excellence." He nodded slowly, considering this. "The Renault partnership accelerates that vision. It doesn't diminish it. And that's what matters most. Not who controls the company, but what impact it has on the world." A smile of genuine pride spread across my father's face. "You know, you remind me of my father in moments like this. He always saw beyond the immediate business concerns to the larger purpose." He gestured to the leather portfolio that now sat prominently on my credenza. "I think he would be extraordinarily proud of the leader you've become." Coming from the man who had once deemed me unworthy to lead the family business, these words carried particular weight. They represented not just reconciliation, but a profound acknowledgement of my growth and vision. "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you might realize." As he left, I turned toward the windows, gazing out at the city where my professional journey had begun, evolved, and now stood poised for its next transformation. The future held uncertainty, as all futures do, but also tremendous possibility for Cornerstone, for our industry, and for my own continued growth as a leader. Whatever came next, I knew with absolute certainty that I was ready for it, not despite the challenges and disappointments of my past, but because of them. They had forged in me a resilience, clarity, and sense of purpose that no amount of easy success could have cultivated. The path forward would undoubtedly bring new challenges and unexpected turns. But standing here now, at the threshold of Cornerstone's next chapter, I welcomed them, ready to build something even more meaningful than what had come before. The Minneapolis winter had settled in with characteristic intensity as I prepared for my trip to Paris to finalize the merger negotiations with Renault Hospitality Solutions. Outside my penthouse windows, snow swirled against the darkening December sky. But inside, Surrounded by strategy documents and financial projections, I felt only a sense of focused clarity. 3 months had passed since our initial discussions with Dominic Renault. What had begun as an unexpected acquisition offer had evolved into a carefully structured merger plan that would preserve Cornerstone's operational autonomy while creating a global powerhouse in restaurant supply and technology. The deal, valued at just over $340 million, would transform both companies and the industry itself. My phone rang, displaying Megan's name. Final revisions to the integration timeline just came in from Renault's team, she reported. Their changes are minimal, mostly coordinating European regulatory approvals with our North American rollout plan. Anything concerning? I asked, making notes in the margins of the document before me. Not at all. If anything, they've given us more autonomy than we initially requested for the technology implementation. Dominic specifically noted that our Restaurant IQ platform should remain under your direct oversight globally. I smiled at this confirmation of Renault's respect for what we'd built. Throughout the negotiation process, Dominic had demonstrated an unusual appreciation for Cornerstone's culture and innovations, not merely seeking to absorb our company, but to genuinely integrate our strengths with his organization's global reach. Perfect. Send my thanks to the team. We'll do a final review tomorrow morning before I leave for Paris. After ending the call, I walked to the windows, watching the snow illuminate in streaks as it passed through the light spilling from neighboring buildings. 10 years ago, even 5, I could never have imagined standing here, preparing to transform a company I'd built from nothing into an international enterprise. The journey from overlooked daughter to industry leader had been anything but straightforward. My intercom buzzed, the doorman announcing a visitor. "Ms. Andrews, your father is here. I hadn't been expecting him. Send him up, please." Minutes later, my father stepped from the elevator into my penthouse, stamping snow from his boots. He carried a bottle of champagne and wore an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad, this is a surprise. I hope I'm not interrupting." He unwound his scarf, glancing at the documents spread across my dining table. "You're preparing for Paris." "Final preparations. I leave tomorrow evening." I took the champagne he offered, an expensive vintage. "What's the occasion?" "Do I need one to visit my daughter?" He smiled, then grew more serious. "Actually, I wanted to see you before you left, to talk about what happens after the merger." I gestured toward the living room. "Let me clear these papers and we can open that bottle." Soon we were seated with glasses of champagne, the snow continuing its silent dance beyond the windows. My father seemed unusually contemplative, studying his glass before speaking. "I've been thinking about cycles," he said finally. "About how life brings us back to similar moments but with different perspectives." "What kind of cycles?" 10 years ago, we sat in my office at Harvest, discussing the future of the company. I made a decision that day that changed both our lives, a decision I've come to recognize as the worst mistake of my professional career. I tensed slightly. We hadn't spoken directly about that painful episode since the acquisition, maintaining an unspoken agreement to focus on present collaboration rather than past grievances. "Dad, we don't need to rehash. Please," he interrupted gently. "Let me say this while I have the courage." I nodded, allowing him to continue. "When I chose Claire over you to lead Harvest, I betrayed not just you but the company itself. I put my own comfort and bias ahead of merit, ahead of what was best for the business my father had built and you had grown. I was wrong, Emma. Profoundly, inexcusably wrong." The directness of his admission caught me off guard. My father had acknowledged mistakes in recent months, but never with such unvarnished clarity. What I couldn't see then, or refused to see, was that you possessed exactly the vision, determination, and leadership ability the company needed. He set his glass down, meeting my eyes directly. "The truth is, I was intimidated by your capabilities, your confidence, your willingness to challenge conventional thinking. You reminded me so much of my father that it made me uncomfortable, because I knew deep down that I had never quite measured up to his example. And here you were, surpassing both of us. I felt a complex surge of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also compassion for the man before me, now willing to confront his own failures with such honesty. When you walked out that day, I convinced myself you were being impulsive, that you'd come back once you'd calmed down. I never imagined you would build something as remarkable as Cornerstone. That took a courage and vision I simply didn't possess. I didn't know I possessed it either, I admitted, until I had no choice but to find out. He nodded, acknowledging this truth. And now you're about to take Cornerstone global through this merger. A company you built from nothing will soon help shape the industry worldwide. Pride shone in his eyes. I couldn't have achieved that, Emma, not in my best years. The merger isn't finalized yet, I reminded him, uncomfortable with praise that still felt unfamiliar coming from him. It will be. His confidence was absolute. Dominic Renault is no fool. He recognizes what I was too blind to see, that you are exactly the leader this industry needs for its next evolution. He reached for his briefcase, removing a manila envelope. Which brings me to the reason for my visit. I have something for you. Something I should have given you years ago. Inside the envelope was a legal document with the simple heading, Transfer of Ownership. Scanning its contents, I realized it was the paperwork transferring my father's remaining personal shares in Cornerstone, shares he had received as part of the Harvest acquisition, back to me. Dad, this isn't necessary. Your shares are rightfully yours. No, he said firmly. They represent the last remnant of my failure to recognize your rightful leadership. I want you to have full control of Cornerstone as you enter these negotiations. Whatever percentage of the combined entity you agree to hold should be yours and yours alone, not diluted by shares I neither earned nor deserve. The gesture was more symbolic than financially significant. His holdings represented less than 3% of outstanding shares, but its meaning transcended the numbers. This was my father relinquishing his last claim to the business I had built, acknowledging fully and finally that Cornerstone was my creation, my legacy. Thank you, I said simply, signing the acceptance line on the document. This means a great deal. He raised his glass in a toast. To cycles completed and new beginnings. The following evening, I boarded the overnight flight to Paris, my mind still processing the conversation with my father. His unexpected vulnerability had shifted, something in our relationship, closing a chapter that had remained unresolved despite our professional reconciliation. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I reviewed one last time the integration plans and governance structures we had negotiated with Renault. The merged entity, to be called Cornerstone Renault globally, would maintain operational headquarters in both Minneapolis and Paris, with technology and product development centered in the United States, while European operations remained under Paris leadership. My role would evolve to Global Chief Executive, with Dominic transitioning to Executive Chairman for a 3-year period before his planned retirement. The board would be equally balanced between Cornerstone and Renault representatives, with key decisions requiring supermajority approval. A structure designed to ensure genuine partnership rather than absorption of the smaller company by the larger. Most importantly, the core values that had defined Cornerstone from its inception, innovation, integrity, and recognition of talent regardless of background, were explicitly incorporated into the merger agreement as guiding principles. For the combined organization, satisfied that we had created a framework that preserved what mattered most while enabling tremendous growth, I finally allowed myself to relax, watching the darkened Atlantic pass beneath us as we crossed toward Europe. Paris welcomed me with uncharacteristically clear skies, and mild December temperatures. A driver met me at Charles de Gaulle Airport, navigating the morning traffic with expertise born of long experience. As we approached the city center, he pointed out landmarks: the distant silhouette of the Eiffel Tower, the dome of Sacré-Cœur gleaming white against the blue sky. "First time in Paris, madame?" he inquired in accented English. "Yes," I admitted, "though I've been to Lyon and Marseille for industry conferences." "Ah, but Paris is different," he assured me with a smile. "Paris changes how you see the world." His words proved prophetic, though not in the way he likely intended. Over the next 3 days, as merger discussions progressed in Renault's elegant headquarters near the Arc de Triomphe, I found my perspective shifting in unexpected ways. Dominique Renault was even more impressive in person than in our video conferences, a gracious host and incisive business leader whose genuine passion for the industry matched my own. He had arranged comprehensive tours of Renault's operations, introducing me to key team members and demonstrating technologies that complemented Cornerstone's innovations. "What has impressed me most about your company," he told me during a private dinner at a small restaurant in Saint-Germain, "is not just your technical achievements, but the culture you've created. Your employees speak about Cornerstone with genuine pride and ownership. That is rare, Ms. Andrews, and infinitely valuable." "Please, it's Emma, and thank you. Building that culture has been as important to me as our financial success." "As it should be." He gestured expansively. "I founded Renault Hospitality Solutions 42 years ago, when the industry was entirely different. Through economic cycles, technological revolutions, and market transformations, it has been our culture, our shared values and sense of purpose, that has sustained us." "Yet you're willing to merge that culture with ours," I observed. "That requires significant trust." His eyes, keen despite his 70 years, studied me thoughtfully. "Trust, yes, but also recognition of necessity. The next evolution of our industry will require both Renault's scale and Cornerstone's innovation. Neither of us can fully achieve it alone." He smiled. "Besides, I have built my career on recognizing exceptional talent, and you, Emma, are exactly what Renault needs for its future." On our final day of discussions, as legal teams worked through last technical details, Dominic invited me to his private office, a warm space filled with books, industry memorabilia, and family photographs. Unlike the minimalist corporate aesthetic of the main headquarters, this room reflected the personality of its occupant. "I wanted to speak with you privately," he explained, closing the door, "about matters beyond the formal agreement." Of course. When I founded this company, I was 30 years old. Like you, I had something to prove. To my former employers who had overlooked my potential, to competitors who underestimated me, to a market that resisted innovation. He moved to a credenza, withdrawing a bottle of cognac and 2 small glasses. "May I?" I nodded, accepting the offered drink. For years, I defined myself through that determination to prove others wrong. It drove me to work harder, to take risks others wouldn't consider, to push boundaries that seemed fixed, and it created considerable success. He gestured around us, indicating the empire he had built. "I recognize that drive in you, Emma. I see it in how you've built Cornerstone, in how you acquired your family's company, in how you've approached these negotiations. It is an immensely powerful force." "But," I prompted, sensing more to his reflections, "but it is also limiting." He sipped his cognac, choosing his words carefully. At some point in my 40s, I realized that building a business to prove others wrong was no longer sufficient motivation. I needed something more meaningful, more forward-looking than vindication. His words resonated unexpectedly, touching on questions I'd been asking myself since Renault's initial offer. "What did you find?" I asked. "Purpose beyond myself." The realization that what I was building would outlast me, that its impact on employees, customers, and the industry itself would be my true legacy. Not the personal vindication I had initially sought, but the positive change my company could create in the world. He leaned forward slightly. I share this because I see in you someone at a similar inflection point. You have proven beyond any doubt what you are capable of. The question now becomes, what will you build with that capability? What legacy will you choose to create? The directness of his insight was startling, as if he had glimpsed thoughts I had barely articulated to myself. In recent months, as the merger discussions progressed, I had indeed begun to think beyond personal achievement toward longer-term impact. You're right, I acknowledged. My early motivation for building Cornerstone was partly to prove my father wrong about my abilities. That served its purpose, perhaps too well. I smiled ruefully. Now I find myself thinking more about the kind of organization I want to build for the future, the standards we might establish, the opportunities we could create for others. Dominic nodded approvingly. Exactly. And that is why I believe this merger is right for both our companies at this moment. Together, we have an opportunity to reshape our industry in meaningful ways, to establish new standards for sustainability, for ethical sourcing, for technological integration, for talent development. He gestured to a photograph on his desk, a much younger Dominic standing proudly before a small storefront bearing the Renault name. I could never have imagined when that picture was taken what this company would become. And I suspect when you opened Cornerstone's first office, you couldn't fully envision where it would lead either. Not even close, I agreed. Now we stand at another such moment of possibility. What we build together in the coming years will likely exceed what either of us can currently imagine. His expression grew more serious. But it will require you to evolve beyond the leader who built Cornerstone into the leader who can guide a global enterprise through its next transformation. You think I'm not ready? I asked, surprised by the suggestion. On the contrary, I think you are precisely ready for this evolution, intellectually, strategically, and emotionally. That is why I pursued this merger with such conviction. He smiled warmly. I simply wanted to acknowledge the transition explicitly, as one entrepreneur to another. The skills that build a company are not always the same ones that transform an industry. Our conversation shifted to more personal topics. His family heritage in the Lion restaurant scene, my grandfather's early days in restaurant supply, our shared love of literature that explored human motivation and growth. By the time we rejoined our respective teams for the final signing ceremony, I felt I had found not just a business partner, but a mentor who understood the journey I was on because he had traveled it himself. The merger agreement was signed with appropriate ceremony in Renault's executive boardroom, photographs taken for press releases, and champagne toasts exchanged among the negotiating teams. But it was Dominic's parting words to me, spoken quietly as our respective entourages prepared to leave, that resonated most deeply. Remember, Emma, that true success is measured not by what we accumulate or achieve, but by what we enable others to become. That will be our shared work in the years ahead. On the flight back to Minneapolis the following day, I found myself reflecting on these conversations against the backdrop of everything that had brought me to this point. From the devastating moment in my father's office 8 years ago to the global merger we had just finalized, the journey had been anything but linear. Each challenge, each obstacle, each moment of doubt had contributed to my development, not just as a business leader, but as a person capable of envisioning something larger than personal vindication. The merger with Renault represented not just the next phase for Cornerstone, but for my own evolution as a leader. As I reviewed the past 8 years, I recognized that my greatest growth had come not from the successes, but from the setbacks, from being overlooked by my father, from the early struggles to fund Cornerstone, from the difficult decisions during our expansion, from discovering Claire's accounting fraud, from questioning whether to pursue the Renault merger. Each of these moments had required me to clarify my values, to distinguish between ego and purpose, to consider impact beyond immediate self-interest. And each had prepared me, in ways I couldn't have anticipated, for the role I now stepped into as global leader of a transformative enterprise. The plane began its descent into Minneapolis, the familiar skyline coming into view against the winter sunset. Snow had fallen during my absence, coating the city in a blanket of pristine white that softened its urban edges. It struck me as an appropriate metaphor for this moment, a fresh beginning built upon a solid foundation, with unlimited potential to create new patterns. My driver was waiting as I emerged from customs, efficiently collecting my luggage and escorting me to the IU waiting car. "Welcome back, Ms. Andrews. Successful trip?" "Very," I confirmed, "though I'm glad to be home." "Where to? Your apartment?" I considered for a moment. "Actually, let's go to the office first. There are a few things I'd like to take care of before tomorrow." Cornerstone's headquarters was quiet at this hour, most employees having departed for the evening. A few lights burned on the executive floor, where Megan and Marcus were likely still working. As I entered the main lobby, the security guard greeted me with a smile. "Evening, Ms. Andrews. Good to have you back." "Thank you, Carl. Working late?" "Just till 8. How was Paris?" "Educational," I replied with a smile, in the best possible way. In my office, I found a stack of congratulatory flowers and notes. Word of the merger had been released through a joint statement while I was in flight. The business press was already speculating about the industry impact, with most analysts predicting significant positive disruption from the combined entity. Megan appeared in my doorway, tablet in hand. "Welcome back. I wasn't expecting to see you tonight." "Just stopping by to check on things. How's the reaction been?" "Overwhelmingly positive. The stock is up 12% on the news. Employees seem excited about the global opportunities, and the industry publications are calling it a game-changing combination." I nodded, pleased, but not surprised. "And internally? Any concerns emerging from the leadership team?" "Nothing significant. A few questions about integration timelines and reporting structures, but the detailed plans we developed have addressed most anxieties." She hesitated, then added, "Your father has been surprisingly helpful, actually. He's been reassuring veteran Harvest employees about the benefits of the merger, emphasizing the growth opportunities for everyone." "That's good to hear," I gestured, for her to sit. "How are you feeling about all this, Megan?" "It's a big change for everyone, including my executive team." She considered the question thoughtfully. "Excited, primarily. The international scope creates opportunities we couldn't have accessed independently, and professionally," she smiled. "Working directly with a legend like Dominic Renault is an education I couldn't get anywhere else." "He is impressive," I agreed, "and he's particularly interested in our talent development initiatives. I think you'll find him an enthusiastic supporter of your work in that area." We discussed operational details for another half hour before Megan departed, promising to have updated integration timelines ready for review the following morning. Left alone, I walked to the windows, gazing out at the Minneapolis skyline, the view that had witnessed Cornerstone's entire journey from startup to global enterprise. So much had changed since the day I'd walked out of Harvest, determined to prove my worth independently. I had built a company that reflected my values, acquired the business that had once rejected my leadership, and now merged with a global leader to create something with potential for worldwide impact. Yet the most meaningful change wasn't in corporate structure or financial metrics. It was in my own evolution from an executive with something to prove to a leader, with something to build beyond herself. My phone chimed with a text message from Claire, surprising me with its timing. "Just saw the merger news. Congratulations, Emma. You've built something truly extraordinary. Dinner when you're free? Would love to catch up." I smiled at this unexpected olive branch. Our relationship had improved gradually in recent months through occasional phone calls and a brief visit when she'd returned to Minneapolis for Thanksgiving. The bitterness that had characterized our early interactions after the acquisition had given way to a tentative reconnection, one that might, with time and effort, evolve into the supportive sisterhood we'd shared as children before our father's preferential treatment had driven us apart. "Thanks," I replied. "Just back from Paris. Dinner next week would be great." "Tuesday?" Her response came quickly. "Perfect. The new place on Washington? My treat." This simple exchange, unimaginable a year ago, represented another cycle completing. Itself, another relationship healing through acknowledgement of past wounds and commitment to future possibilities. As I prepared to leave, a final text arrived, this one from my mother. "Your grandfather would be so proud, Emma. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. We all are." The words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. My grandfather had been gone for decades, but his influence had shaped my life in ways I was only now fully appreciating. His business principles, preserved in the journal I'd inherited from my father, had guided many of my decisions. His belief in ethical leadership and genuine innovation had informed Cornerstone's values from its inception. Would he indeed be proud of the path I'd taken, of the company I'd built, of the global enterprise it was becoming through this merger? I like to think so. Not because of its financial success or market position, but because it embodied the principles he had valued most: integrity, innovation, and recognition of human potential. As I gathered my things to leave, my eyes fell on my grandfather's leather portfolio, now prominently displayed on my credenza. Within it lay the history of our family's business journey across 3 generations. His founding vision, my father's stewardship, and now my transformation and expansion of that legacy. What would the next chapter hold? What new possibilities would emerge from the combination of Cornerstone's innovation with Renault's global infrastructure? What opportunities would we create for employees, for customers, for the industry itself? The answers would unfold in the coming months and years, shaped by decisions yet to be made and challenges yet to be faced. But standing here at the threshold of this new beginning, I felt something I hadn't fully experienced before. A sense of purpose that transcended personal achievement, a vision focused on impact rather than vindication. 8 years ago, devastated by my father's rejection, I had walked away from Harvest determined to prove him wrong about my capabilities. Today, having built Cornerstone, acquired Harvest, and merged with Renault, I stood ready to lead from a different motivation entirely, not to prove my worth, which was now beyond question, but to create something of lasting value that would outlive my tenure and influence the industry for generations to come. My father had been wrong about me, yes, but that reality had long since ceased to define my ambitions or limit my vision. The journey from overlooked daughter to global CEO had transformed not just my professional position, but my understanding of success itself, from external validation to meaningful impact, from personal achievement to collective possibility. As I left the office and stepped into the winter evening, snow beginning to fall once again, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for everything that had brought me to this moment. The triumphs and disappointments, the recognition and rejection, the victories and setbacks. Each had contributed to the leader I had become and the future I could now help create. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to define what Cornerstone Renault could become. I would face them not as the wounded daughter seeking vindication, but as the confident leader ready to build something truly meaningful, something that honored the past while creating possibilities neither my grandfather nor my father could have imagined. And that, I realized as my driver navigated the snow-covered streets toward home, was the most satisfying victory of all. Not proving others wrong, but proving to myself what was possible when determination met opportunity, when personal ambition evolved into shared purpose, when the need to prove oneself transformed into the desire to build something that mattered. My phone buzzed with an email from Dominic, a brief note sharing initial positive reactions from Renault's European leadership team and suggesting we schedule our first global town hall for January. "The real work begins now," he concluded. "I look forward to building this future together." I smiled, typing a quick response of agreement before turning my attention back to the city passing outside my window, the place where everything had both ended and begun for me 8 years ago, with a painful rejection that had ultimately led to my greatest growth. Life's most important journeys rarely follow straight lines. Mine had twisted through valleys of disappointment and peaks of achievement, through moments of betrayal and instances of unexpected support. Each turn had shaped me, challenged me, prepared me for what came next. Now, as one chapter closed and another opened, I embraced not just the destination, but the winding path that had brought me here. Grateful for every step, even the painful ones, that had transformed me from someone with something to prove into a leader with something meaningful to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.